Welcome to Sense of Self, a podcast about the stories we tell ourselves about who we are and what happens when they stop working. I'm your host, Dr. Gauri Aragon.
I remember crying on the floor, sobbing, and saying, I can't keep doing this. I feel like I'm dying. And then I realized at that moment that leaving medicine would be like me dying to them anyway. But I felt like if I was gonna die anyway, I might as well try to live.
On today's episode, I'm interviewing Shay. We're actually really good friends, and for that reason, we're doing something a little different this episode. I've known Shay for a long time, and we've had a lot of conversations about identity and mental health. So I'm going to be popping in a couple times during the interview to help fill in some parts of her story. We discussed a wide range of moments from her life, like when she began to notice the impact of racism on her mental health, or how her family responded to her decision to quit her surgical residency. This episode contains discussions about suicide and racial trauma, which may be distressing or triggering for some listeners. If you or someone you know is struggling with thoughts of suicide or self-harm, please seek help from a mental health professional or contact a crisis helpline. It's important to note that these discussions do not constitute mental health care. Each guest has given their consent to participate, has had full control over what aspects of their journey were shared, and either currently engages in therapy or has done so in the past. Hey, Shay. How are you doing today?
I'm okay. I'm in good spirits. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm in a good mood. I was excited about this. I was excited to do this.
Yeah. Well, I think what would be awesome is if you want to just introduce yourself. I would love to just have you say what your name is, what you go by, just so kind of we know who we're talking to today.
I'm Shay Akintoran. I was born in Chicago. I'm a first-generation Nigerian immigrant. I'm a doctor.
What's your full name?
My full name is, I actually have 4 middle names, so it's like kind of long, but my full name is Oluseyi Monisala Adekemi Monisade Oluwadamilola Akintoran, which is my full name. But I go by Shay, but that's not necessarily what my family calls me.
Yeah, what does your family call you?
Shay, which is probably the proper way to pronounce my full name. But there's been like so much in these days about people insisting on having their name pronounced correctly and all that kind of stuff. And I've just been reluctant because I don't really feel that those two people are the same person.
I also have a sense of how I present my own name in those exact settings. And so it gives me a good context. Wait, so I guess the question there is, when you think about Shay versus Shay, I don't want to make any assumptions. So I'm just curious, like who Shay is versus who Shay is. And if you want to start with Shay or Shay, I take your pick, but I would love to understand the difference between them.
I feel like Shay is a person, like I said, the person who I feel like who I was like a role I was forced into playing, which is why I think of it as a caricature of myself, even though it's comes from my family of origin. So it sounds a bit weird to say that. I think that Shay, I would say that she was a good person, or she tried to be, but I don't think that was the center of my universe. I think it was so much more about what people thought about me or responding or reacting to what people thought about me. I was like very self-conscious, very unself-aware, very much like one of those people who like blamed outside circumstances for my current situation. And I always felt a lot of pressure, and I didn't feel like Shay had a good sense of self either at all.
I would love to understand what your definition of good person is in this case.
I think that I've had for a long time, or in my past, had an unsure sense of whether or not I was a good person. I think part of me wanted to believe that I was, but that is something that was like actually directly challenged in my upbringing. Not only are my parents like, Nigerian immigrants, they're both doctors, at the top of their field. They are also like what I would describe as like extremist evangelical Christians. And I don't know what about me made me this way, but I feel like I came out skeptical. I've always been skeptical of religion. So I was never good enough because I didn't fully like accept the indoctrination. So the only real like value I had was my academic accomplishments. In fact, like when I was like younger, there was a time where my dad literally said to me that I was like the only problem in our family. And it's something that I held on to and that, haunted me for like many years following, and sort of this feeling that like I'm the only problem in this unit. I think that there was part of me that always doubted the idea that I was just a problem. I think that there was like the small, tiny flicker of like self worth that I retained. And I do think it was that small flicker that was able to keep me alive long term and able to motivate me to get out of the situations that I found myself in. The other thing too is that like with my family, typical immigrant family, it's like doctor, lawyer, pharmacist. For my parents, it actually was just doctor. It really is just doctor.
If you could just kind of zoom in on Shay for a second, right? Because obviously you grew from Shay, right? When you think back to the people who you're responding to, who comes to mind when you think about if you didn't have control of your sense of self, who did back then when you were Shay?
My childhood was in Oak Park, which is more of like a middle class suburb of Chicago. And it was more like diverse. There was all different kinds of people with all different kinds of stories and all different kinds of backgrounds. My parents were in residency at the time, and residents made even less than they do now. They were making very little money and then put what they had together to like buy a small house. The weight and the pressure of things wasn't fully on me until I moved to Oakbrook, which is a much wealthier neighborhood and much more white. In my middle school, I was the only Black person in the whole middle school, and I was new and had come from like a middle class place, so I didn't know anything about Abercrombie and Fitch and Limited Too and all those archaic brands that nobody cares about anymore. But I got bullied so much so that my parents had to like pull me out of that school and take me to this weird Christian school, and I came back to Hinsdale Central. So basically, I went to Bean Girls High School, and it was effectively the same sort of situation. But I think that by that point, I was armed with the knowledge of what it meant to exist in the context that I was in and perform appropriately, and in order to be successful and get to where I wanted to be.
So you're alluding to this thing that we have not talked about yet, which is this almost like template of how to be a good Black person, how to be a good student, how to be a good immigrant, how to be a good woman, how to be a good minority, all these things. So I guess the question, of course, is like, who wrote that rule book? Where did those rules come from? It sounds like some from your family, maybe a lot from your family.
So I think it's important to know that my parents worked at the Cook County Hospital. You're really in the thick of all the things that occur in big cities and all the ills that can occur, I think. And I think that my mom, from a young age, wanted us to distance ourselves as much as possible from that type of Blackness. Like, I had gone to the racially mixed preschool, and it's one of my few early childhood memories. I remember coming home, saying something like, "I'm gonna go out," or "I'm gonna go do something," and my mom being like, you don't talk like that. You don't talk like that. That's not how you talk. You're not like them," kind of thing. And that's something that from an early stage was ingrained into me to create distance between myself and that version. Because if I was that version, then I would be vulnerable to all the sort of oppression and violence and things that Black Americans are subjected to by this country. And I think that's just the reality of it.
You just connected two things, right? You connected being a particular kind of Black person
Yeah.
in that context with vulnerability. Whereas it sounds like what you're also suggesting there is that being the kind of Black person maybe your mom wanted you to be, or not being the kind of person that your mom didn't want you to be, somehow, did that equate safety then? Was that sort of the trade-off?
That's exactly right. And actually, just to put it more starkly, I didn't know all this when I was growing up. Obviously, this is something I came to understand. But during that time, I drive a C-Class Mercedes-Benz, okay? And it's old. It's like a 2006 because I got it in high school, okay? Because I'm spoiled. But anyway, my brother and my sister both drive one too. And my sister is like careless. She doesn't keep doors locked. But she went to USC for medical school. It was like when Philando Castile got murdered in like 2016. So it was around that time, like Trump was arising out of this Black Lives Matter, where it just was a scary time. And I said, I don't know if my sister should drive that car where she's living in LA because I don't want it to get broken into. She can be careless, that kind of thing. And my mom outright said that she would probably be more safe from the police if she was driving that car. And that was a mind-blowing moment for me because before that time, I had never actually connected those things, like the sense of safety with performing Blackness in the right kind of way. It was a way, I guess, in her mind or in their mind, a way of trying to protect us from society.
Yeah. You're also describing, which I think is common for a lot of people. It's like you are in society as you, but also in the context of your family, right? So part of society's messages are also interpreted through your family, through your mom, through your dad. And I'm just curious for your parents, right? What did they expect of you?
Academic achievement was the only thing that gave you value, I feel, in society. Or I think that's what they thought, at least. Or that was at least the message. That's how I internalized the message. Academic achievement was the only way to achieve value.
I can relate to that. That strong, deep immigrant mentality.
Yeah,
okay.
Exactly. So that's the way to circumvent a lot of this stuff, is just do well in school, become a doctor or a lawyer.
Shay can see these connections between her achievements and the pressure her parents put on her to accomplish them, because they equated them with safety. But while she was growing up, the stakes were not so obvious. Her awareness of it grew over time as she kept trying to achieve the next thing. First, it was to graduate high school, then to graduate college, then go to med school, and then residency. And each new place she went demanded even more of her.
You know, in Hinsdale, everybody's there is affluent. So it wasn't as potent or as direct or as in your face. It was all more subtle because I was really good at school and I hung around with the honors kids. And long and short is that probably the quote honors track kids, there's probably like 150 of us or so. So we were in a very small group of people and we were all friends and we were all living in this colorblind, racist kind of world, but I don't see color version of things. I didn't realize until I took critical race theory like many years later that it's also a form of racism, colorblind racism. I never felt the pressure of it as such. But then when I went to college, I started to feel it. But you could avoid it, and there was a lot of other things going on. But the thick of it was medical school. That was my rude awakening. I had an outright racist experience where someone literally said, the reason I'm treating you differently is because of the color of your skin, which was like, it was wild. Yeah, because like in medical school, I had this mentor who taught me how to perform in the hospital and, quote, maintain control of the situation by presenting myself a certain way, acting a certain way, and keeping quiet and observing people and then responding to them and basically parroting back what they wanted to hear, who basically taught me how to perform, how to perfect my performance. So medical school, I was really struggling initially, but then I learned that in my surgery rotation, and that took me all the way through. But then I matched.
Shay had applied and matched in cardiothoracic surgery, which is an incredibly difficult specialty. And she matched at the University of Pittsburgh, meaning she was going to spend the rest of her training as a doctor at this program.
When I started residency at Pitt, I came armed with all the tools that I found to be necessary to do well in surgery, which meant keeping my hair a certain way. I would keep my hair in this, I always would wear this straight, black, mid-chest length wig, and I would wear these fake glasses, like Ray-Ban glasses, so it would like hide my facial expressions behind it. I have 20/15 vision, so I don't need to wear glasses. They were fake. And also in terms of the way I spoke and trying to be very careful about what I said, I came armed with all of those behavioral things. I felt a lot of those tools had worked well enough for me in medical school and in fact were responsible for the success that I had.
You and I've talked about this a bunch, the kind of dual-sided coin of these bad experiences. Like on one hand, being elsewhere and having these tools work for you felt like it was keeping you safe, right? Felt like it was keeping you getting through. And on the other hand, it sounds like it was also just enabling this kind of fabrication, this like fantasy, this like lie that you were telling yourself to some degree. And I think at Pittsburgh, it was the first time where like what you had in you, it wasn't enough. Right?
Yeah, exactly. It's like the first cracks in the sort of fantasy or belief that you could be a different type of Black person and you won't be subjected to a lot of the sort of marginalization and harassment and basically institutionalized racism that
Yeah.
the quote other type of Black people are subjected to. Because it didn't matter then in Pennsylvania. It did not matter what I did. First time I got called a liar when I was at UPMC was very early in my time there. I was talking to my attending, who was this blonde-haired, blue-eyed female colorectal surgeon. And what I said was that this patient had a UTI because they had 10,000 units of E. coli. And it was a simple mistake. The definition of a UTI is 100,000 units of E. coli. So she assumed that I was lying as opposed to just there being a deficit in my knowledge, which is racist. That was the first time. And it created a target on my back where literally anything that came out of my mouth was scrutinized and looked at. And even like behind my back, I found out later that people lie and say like I didn't wear shoes in the OR. I think it just wasn't enough.
Can you talk about like the relationship between that dawning on you and then kind of state of your mental health around the same time?
It resulted in a sort of rapid decline of my mental health. Yeah, I became increasingly depressed and isolated myself more, and the feelings of failure and shame became increasingly overwhelming to the point where I had been really against antidepressants for a while. I finally went on Prozac, but I don't know if it's a black box warning or if it was because at the time I was really suicidal. I remember crossing this bridge like right before where I lived on Aiken Street and being like, might be good to just throw myself off this bridge. Just be done with this whole thing.
You got that to that point, to that level. I guess looking back on it now, right? Did you have any sense at that time of any of this kind of what we're talking about, right? Which is like this idea of performance, it not working.
I think it was entirely internalized. I think I entirely felt I didn't see it as part of a greater social construct. I didn't necessarily even identify it as racism. I just saw it as personal failure and personal inadequacy.
That is, it's making my body just like I'm starting to sweat and starting to feel like my heart race in thinking about that and putting myself in your shoes, right? Because I think I asked you that question in a previous interview, which is, did you ever feel like it was just you?
Yeah.
And it sounds like absolutely. You felt like it was, this is just me. This is just Shay. I am what? How would you fill in that blank? Like, I am
a failure. Part of me, though, when I was at Pittsburgh, there was this fundamental sense of how I would need to escalate my mask in order to make things work at Pittsburgh. I think that there was a need to fight dirty. There was another Black former fellow who basically told me what to do. I needed to combat them with the same sort of malice that they were coming at me with. And I remember one day walking through the hallway at Pitt and thinking, this place is going to darken my soul if I stay here. And whatever light that still exists, because even though I felt sometimes I would feel like a bad person, I knew there were still moments of that goodness that kind of shone through. There were people in medical school, like this radiologist I knew who saw good in me. And when I say saw good in me, I would go to radiology all the time and visit him, and we would talk about imagery and just talk about life and the ocean. And he took photos of like lighthouses. I don't know, being able to connect on like a human level about human things, like beauty, natural beauty, and the earth, the sea, things like that. That made me still feel connected to my humanity.
And when you were walking through the halls and you realized like I have to leave or else I'm going to lose my soul, did you feel like you were done with surgery and medicine, or were you just done with Pitt?
I was done with Pitt. I wasn't sure I was done with surgery. I said that it might just be the way that they're doing it here. It may just be this department, because that department was particularly toxic and known nationally to be toxic in Macmillan. So I thought maybe it's not surgery. After I quit Pittsburgh, I entered basically what we call the scramble, and basically where you look for leftover spots after the primary match happens. And I was able to secure a preliminary surgical residency spot at University of Michigan or Michigan Medical Center for a year, but that did not guarantee me the rest of training. And I will say, Michigan was a place where surgery was done in a way that would not have sucked my soul. They actually cared about patients there. So there are places where I feel like I could have done medicine in a way that wouldn't have put out my leg. But unfortunately, I did not match them.
So I can't overstate what a big deal it was that Michigan did not have a spot for Shay. It was a place she got to experience the good parts of medicine. A place that restored her faith enough that she thought it was worth finding a new place to finish her training. And a place that wanted to keep her, but didn't have a spot available. She did, however, find a spot in Boston, a place she was familiar with from her time in med school there. But Boston came with its own challenges that changed the course of Shay's life in ways she could have never predicted. So I guess the next part we want to talk about is basically a little bit about Boston.
I just saw my eye and my mouth twitch when you said Boston. I was
I know.
I was like, wow. It's like a flash of contempt. I was like, wow, that's a strong reaction. Boston was like a known evil, right? Because I had gone out into the world and gotten beaten down and bitten. So at least I'd be going back to a sense of some form of familiarity. I had some friends in Boston. I thought that I could just put on the performance that I put on in medical school.
It worked before, so
maybe it'll work this time. But the truth of the matter is, like, as soon as I got to Boston, I distinctly remember my first rotation was at Boston Children's Hospital. And I remember thinking, I'm not going to finish this program. And it was before I had even experienced anything. I think I just knew.
Was that a feeling? Was that a physical feeling? Yeah, how did you know?
It was a physical feeling. It was a heaviness. It was a lightness. It was like a dissociation almost. It felt like dissociating. It just felt like I was living somebody else's life. I just didn't feel like this was my life. You have to understand the context of a lot of the stuff that's happening to me is also the context of the American political climate. Obama became president when I went to college, so any sort of idea of blackness, performing blackness in the right way, getting deconstructed, that got like totally snuffed out by like the mythos of Barack Obama. You know what I mean? Because he was literally the embodiment of the right kind of black person. Like, he talked right, he acted right, and he was talking about hope and change and all that kind of stuff. So that was also a big part of it. Then on top of that, the context of that too is this whole concept of Black identity and Blackness is coming into question because of the socio-political climate and this crescendo that's occurring in society. I think about it as like a slow, terrible crescendo of noise, like a whisper that turns into a scream. Oh, so this whole idea of Blackness that I've been performing is just a tool to protect myself from harm in a society that literally wants to gun us down in the street like dogs. So if I wasn't driving this car, then I would just be gunned down like a dog. What makes me better than those people who are getting shot at for no fucking reason? How am I different? Why? Because I drive a nice car? I'm a human being. They're human beings just like me. You know what I mean? How can this be happening? And then I'm in the context of Boston, again, re-experiencing the same very clear racism that I had experienced again. You know what I mean? And just like I said in Pittsburgh, that it was my mental health that was the tell, my mental health started to get a little bit shaky as time went on. And then it all came to a head when I started having health problems with my womb. And in this time, after all this stress and all of this sadness and all of this, I've always wanted kids, but my uterus erupted into fibroid tumors, tons of them. And my OBGYN, she described me with the word immunocompromised. That's why a lot of this stuff is happening to you. And I thought, after all this time, after everything I've done performing for this society that doesn't give a fuck about me, doesn't even see me as human, thinks it's controversial to say that my life matters as a Black person, I'm now allowing my very body, my only body, to deteriorate as a result of this fucking pointless game I'm playing. And I couldn't help but ask myself, for what? For what? For who? For who? And that was the end. Then I just started planning, how am I going to get out of here? I remember sitting in the call room and thinking to myself, what do I do this time? What happens if I walk away? Can I walk away? Can I survive walking away? Is it possible to? Because I had such a narrow version of reality, right? Because the only good things or only worthy things I could be were a pharmacist, a lawyer, a doctor. And if I'm leaving residency for now the third fucking time, it's going to be very hard to be a doctor again.
I'm just curious, you're describing so much of this and it feels like you're alone in all of these thought processes and all these decisions.
Yeah, I was very alone. Sometime during, I could look at my phone and figure it out if it was during my first year or second year at BI, I'm not sure. It was the fall. A family friend of ours who basically was getting married later in life, and it was the last time I saw my family in person before I stopped speaking with them for a while, which I did not start speaking with them again until I moved out to California. I remember crying on the floor, sobbing, and saying, I can't keep doing this. I can't continue on. I feel like I'm dying. And it was like, don't say that in front of your sister. And then I realized at that moment that they're so indoctrinated that I don't think it really matters to them if I live or die. Because leaving medicine would be like me dying to them anyway. But I felt like if I was gonna die anyway, I might as well try to live.
I think it is really important for me personally to acknowledge that what you're describing here is tremendously difficult for anybody to do.
Thanks.
And I'm just like, I'm overwhelmed, I think, with emotion, but also in awe of kind of what you're describing, because the easy question is, God, Shay, how did you do that? What did you do? And then how did you do that? But why was it worth it to you to do that?
You know, I realized that I didn't want to die young. I actually, around that time, this book called When Breath Becomes Air came out, and which is about like a neurosurgery resident who found out that he had like metastatic cancer in his last year of residency and then like died before he finished. And I remember buying that book and being totally unable to read it or finish it because I was just so afraid that that would happen to me, that I would have lived my life pursuing something that had nothing to do with me for people who like think that they love me, but don't love me in the way that I deserve to be loved. And, you know, betraying my own needs, my own desires for my entire life, just for like what? For my life to be like cut short at the end of a career I never wanted. It just was my absolute nightmare.
Could you describe a little bit about how you were feeling about yourself at the time? What was going through your head?
I feel like when I was in Boston, I finally started to realize that a lot of the choices that I'd made with my career and with my life were in reaction to things, like in reaction to my parents, in reaction to racialized constructs, in reaction to what people, like capitalism, I don't know, what people perceive as successful or academic elitism, whatever you want to call it. I felt a lot of my life, I began to realize a lot of my life had been in reaction to things. And I had this feeling that I didn't want to continue to live, or I told myself, I just wanted to live in reaction to stuff. I wanted to just be. I wanted to just be. I don't know. I just wanted to live for the sake of living. Like, why am I defining myself based on what I'm accomplishing or producing? Why can't I just be a person? That's what I wanted.
And then how did that then lead to you leaving for California?
When I was in medical school, there was I think I used to call them the California crew, there's like a bunch of people who had come to California to go to Tufts Medical School and then had gone back. And I always was like, those people are so fucking weird. They're like carefree. They're like too happy. They smile too much. They like having happy, stable lives way too much. They prioritize personal peace like so much. Like, what the fuck is wrong with them? This is literally the thoughts I had in my head as a medical student. That's what I thought of them. I was like, these people are so fucking happy and it's gross. I think that if the question is why California, it was the pursuit of that peace, that sense of peace, that sort of joy or California bullshit that I had written off, the pursuit of finding happiness that was not directly related to achievement. That was intrinsic and internal, and that came from the existence of, or like the experience of just existing, of being human. It's not about what I'm producing or what I'm creating or what I'm striving towards. It's about just living.
You had a sense of, wait, there's still a core of me within this shell. Before it fully hardens, before I am stuck with the shell forever, if I want to live, I need to figure out how to not only identify that core of me, but also nurture it in a way that is slow, that's steady, that's flexible, that gives room for mistakes and tough times.
Yeah. And it didn't break in a week. It didn't break in a month. It didn't break in a year. And at the same time, you know what I mean? It was a long time to build that identity. So it's a long time to heal from it and to rebuild.
For Shay, moving to California wasn't just to move across the country. It was a whole new way to see herself. And it was around this time that we first met and became friends. Shay says that when she thinks about that point in her life, she thinks about the first thing she posted when she got to San Francisco.
I moved to California on September 18th, and I filmed an IG story, which I could see in my mind. And little Lewa was in her little dog crate with her head out. She was there like this. Puts her head, sticks her chin out. And I was like, we made it. And then as we were crossing the Bay Bridge, I put on Transatlanticism, which is a Death Cab for Cutie song. And I think I like wept in the car for joy, for loss, for hope of what would be, for sadness over what was, but for also gratefulness.
Because you're describing, hey, here's what I was, here's what I did, here's what I was told was going to keep me safe, keep me doing well, keep me successful. And now you're inhabiting a lifestyle and a way of being that is different than that. And a lot of people have a hard time with that.
It's dangerous because it has the ability and the potential to totally
upend your entire life. A lot of times people don't know. People don't know what they have left.
I was wondering if you wouldn't mind just for a moment sharing who you are. Who is Shay?
I'm brave. I'm still smart because I was always smart. So I'm brave. I'm smart. I'm a good writer. I'm a good friend. I'm fun to be around. I've got a lot of different interests. I'm creative. I'm loving. I'm lovable, which is key because I never thought I was before. And even though it's like I'm practicing medicine right now as like a moonlighter who like didn't fully finish residency, I'm a pretty good doctor, girl.
So would you mind sharing what you're doing right now?
The whole dream of coming out to California is I want to become a therapist and work with Black women and trauma, and then also probably work with residents too, because I have a very intimate experience with the traumas of being a physician in America. I've been working at UCSF as a moonlighter. So I work nights and I take care of patients at night. And then during the day, I spend my days gardening and healing and taking care of my dogs. I just got married. And what's funny is I am going to get to my goal. I'm working towards it right now. I'm working with psychologists and all that kind of stuff. I'm moving towards my goals and stuff. But even if I didn't, and I always think, I said many times that I always think, what would happen if I died tomorrow? Like, I would have so much regret. I don't feel that way anymore. I don't need to meet that goal in order to be fulfilled as a person. I feel fulfilled in who I am now as a human. I don't need to have more degrees and more things and more like wealth or whatever, like fame or anything to be fulfilled. I'm okay being fairly simple. I live a fairly simple life these days, but it's okay. I'm happy with it. And I think it's okay. And I think that's like the greatest gift of this whole journey of mine is that when your identity is no longer a function of the things around you and it comes from within, it provides a sense of security that is so much better and bigger than any sort of achievement could ever give you.
Thank you for listening to the season finale of Sense of Self. We hope you enjoyed Shay's story and want to thank her again for her vulnerability, honesty, and trust. We also want to thank you, the listeners, for joining us this pilot season. We've been so honored to share the stories of these 5 guests with you and hope to bring you a second season soon. Please follow us wherever you listen to podcasts and on social media for information on future release dates. Links to all episodes and social media accounts are on our website, www.senseofselfpod.com. Sense of Self is a podcast from The Mission Entertainment. This episode was produced by Andrew Coles and Zinga Murray, Elizabeth Rose, Allison Keeley, and myself, Gauri Aragon. It was edited by Ben Montoya and Allison Keeley and mixed by Asia Simpson with music from Blue Dot Sessions.